Yes.
Terrific.
So 3, 2, 1, action. So,
Hello. What would you like me to answer for you?
a few questions and yeah.
Okay.
So, what is your first memory?
What is my first memory?
Yes.
Oh. I have to think way back. The thing that impressed me the most when I was a youngster is that my parents both worked, and I was home alone, and I had a cousin who was an usher in the theater, and he encouraged me to come into the theater. I was about 5 or 6 years old, and see a film, and he, as an usher, he would come up and down the aisle a few times to check on me. Well, the movie that I went to see was The Invisible Man. That scared me to death. When somebody was wrapped in bandages and they took the bandages off and there was nothing there. Whoa! I jumped up out of the seat and I ran out of the theater. I was really scared.
How old were you?
5 or 6.
Okay.
And it was cuckoo. Everybody came running after me. My cousin, who was the usher, kept saying, "Get him before he runs out in the street." I have a memory of that as being the most ridiculous thing I ever did, and how stupid it was to go to something like that. Anyway, so that I have that memory of very early in my childhood.
Okay. So, who's the oldest relative that you remember, and what do you remember about him or her?
Well, I would have to say it's my grandmother who lived with us. And for part of the time, we had to share the same bedroom because we had a very small unit. And when she came to live with us, there was no place for her to sleep except in the same room as me. And we hung a blanket up on a clothesline between the two beds. And I always felt uncomfortable about that, but she was a lovely, sweet old lady.
Was
she
this
was
your
probably
mom's?
the oldest, my mother's mother,
Okay.
and that was in Detroit.
So,
Okay?
yes. How did your parents meet?
How did my parents meet? That's an interesting story, too. My dad had a clothing store, a haberdashery store in New Haven. He was a bachelor, and my mother had just come to New Haven, and she had a job of trying to talk people into buying tickets to a dance. I don't know what the dance was, for some Jewish organization. And when she came into the store, my dad said, "Well, I'll buy a ticket from you if you go to the dance with me." And that happened. They were married maybe 1.5 years after that in New Haven. It was great.
So tell me about your childhood home.
My childhood home. Well, you already know that my grandmother lived with us, so that was interesting. And both of my parents worked. I'm an only child, but I had a cousin, and in our house there were 2 flats next to each other, side by side, and the uncle and aunt who had the apartment next to us were working also, and their daughter was 2 years older than me, my cousin Ray. And so the two of us hung out together after school and in the evening, and she frequently ate dinner at our house. I have that vision of having somebody who was not my sister but was close enough to be like a sister. But I attended this club, and I was taken. I was out of college. I had come back to Detroit from Ann Arbor, Michigan, and the first thing I did was find this interesting Zionist club to join. And she was very active about Israel, and she sang a lot of songs, played the guitar, the khalil, the flute, the drums, and I said, "Wow, this is fantastic. So I walked her home the first night, and we got acquainted, and we stayed together until we got married.
Okay. Tell me about your wedding day.
I was in the Army in 1954, drafted, and I was out in San Francisco. And we had made arrangements that while I was in basic training, my wife would go to Israel and visit relatives. And when basic training was over, she would come out, and we would be wherever they sent me. We would try to be together and get married. When we discovered that I was going to San Francisco, I said, let's get married before I have to move to San Francisco. So it was in December of 1954, the 28th of December, in a heavy snowstorm in Detroit. The streets were slicky ice, and people were afraid to drink too much, that they would have a disastrous accident going home. But that was our wedding in Detroit in the end of the year.
Okay. Tell me about the day your first child was born.
Tell me about the day
Your first child was born.
first child was born. Well, that was pretty exciting. We were both only children, and we let our parents, who still lived in Detroit, and we were in San Francisco, let them know that this is coming. And I was in the process of building our house in Sausalito, which was a little town across from the Golden Gate Bridge. And I knew that when we had to go to the hospital, it would be crossing the bridge going into San Francisco. That was pretty exciting. We went to the hospital early, and they said, "No, go back. It's not ready." We turned around, went back, and we had a feeling we better go back. So went back and forth 2 or 3 times, and that was it. The first child was our son, Sam. He was born in 1958.
Okay. What were your favorite school subjects?
Oh, well, it was always architecture, art, painting, drawing, engineering, drafting, whatever had to do with illustration.
Okay. So tell me about your favorite teacher.
Oh my God. My favorite teacher. Well, actually, my favorite teacher was in college. He was a great, very talented architect who had come from Austria in the early 40s and opened a practice in Ann Arbor. And I got to work for him in addition to being on some special projects at Ann Arbor, which made me feel very important. It was really great.
Okay. Tell me about some of your friends.
Tell me something about
Some of your friends.
some of my friends. Oh my. Well, in Detroit, I had great friends in high school and in college in Ann Arbor, and we formed a group that got together a lot. And then I got talked into joining a group called Demolay, which was a branch of the Masons, and I ended up becoming the leader of that group all over Michigan. And so I would go up to the Upper Peninsula and try to recruit people to be part of the Demolay. What did I know? It was a silly thing, but it was fun.
Okay. Describe your first job.
My first job was while I was in high school. I worked for a company that did breweries in Detroit, and I was 15 years old or 16, and the very first job I had to do was to accompany a draftsman who was going to measure a racking room. This was during the war, World War II, and the Stroh Brewery only made beer in barrels, but the Army wanted beer to get to the soldiers, and they had to convert their racking room into an assembly line for making beer in bottles and in cans. So we were supposed to measure that racking room and draw it up so that the existing conditions would all be knowledgeable. And the draftsman did that, and he called out dimensions to me, and I drew them. This was my first job. But in that brewery, as you came in the door, they gave everybody who came in a bucket, like a pail. And I didn't know what to do with that. But the first time the bell rang, everybody who had a bucket got up and got in line. They'd break a barrel of beer, and everybody would get in line and fill their bucket with beer. Well, I was just a kid, but I followed the draftsman who I was helping.
Who are some of your heroes?
Some of my heroes?
Yeah.
Well, in architecture, I was always impressed by Frank Lloyd Wright. He would come to our school and talk to us.
Wow.
I knew him then. And I worked for Buckminster Fuller. And I had a lot of interesting architects that I worked for in San Francisco. This was the period when Raphael Soriano, who was a famous architect, hired me to be a draftsman. A lot of other firms. So I had quite a few heroes to be interested in.
What is your experience or opinion of computers and the internet?
I used to draw everything by hand, pencil, the slide rule, drafting table, or in ink, vellum. And then the computer, the CAD system of drafting came along. And if you didn't know how to operate that machine, you were useless. You couldn't do the drawings. And it just changed my whole attitude about being an architect. So I was not happy when the computer took over a lot of the work. I'm sure it made a lot of sense economically to save people a lot of work and money, but those of us that used to draw the old-fashioned way felt we were being kicked out of our work.
Okay. So tell me about some of your favorite songs, books, movies, and television shows.
Well, you know, I grew up in the 20s and 30s, which is a long time ago, and there wasn't any television then. But I used to listen to the radio at night, and you had to visualize what these people looked like because you didn't see them. There were a lot of wonderful serials and events that later on became part of television, and we would see them then. So it was pretty good. I liked radio.
Okay, so tell me about some of the places you've been the happiest.
Some of the things.
Some of the places where you've been the happiest.
Oh, well, I guess I've been happy with family. That's wonderful. I've been lucky that we were a very good family, very close, loving. And I love to travel. So we've been to lots of interesting places all over the world, which is great. And I was very happy to come out here this weekend. It was just fabulous for this week. See family.
So where were you when you heard that President Kennedy was shot?
Wow. I was home. And I guess somebody called and said, turn on the television. And I did. They didn't say why. And I was just riveted to the television at the time everything was going on. It was this terrible disaster.
Alright, so what haven't we talked about that you would like to discuss in the time we have left?
Well, I would like to hear, well, I guess if you're asking me to discuss something, I'd like to know how all of you have come together as a family that's so lovable.
Luck.
It's really great.
You're very lucky.
We come from good people, right?
You are lucky that you come from good people, that's true.
Yeah.
So we wrapped everything up.
Thank you very much for letting me answer those questions
Thank you.
spontaneously.